Hi everyone, welcome to the A Life of Education podcast. So today we're here with Chelsea Spackman and we're going to be talking about celiac disease. So
Yes.
Chelsea, do you want to let us know a little bit about your background and what led you to be obviously
Interested in celiac disease?
Yeah.
Well, I first went to school right after high school for English and journalism and really disliked it. And I had a really severe eating disorder and spent a lot of time worrying about food, and my whole life was consumed with calories and foods and different ways of eating, different ways of weight loss and controlling my body. And at a very last straw, the last thing I could think of that my family could think of was to get me involved with a nutritionist. So if I could understand how food worked in my body, I could understand that I'm allowed to eat. That was kind of the first stepping stone. And I worked with a nutritionist, and she enlightened me. She was amazing. She saved my life completely. And because of her, I decided that I wanted to go to school for nutrition. So I went to the Canadian School of Natural Nutrition, and then I did my degree in health sciences. And then I completed my master's in science of personalized nutrition at Middlesex University in the UK, and I graduated in 2017. I had my graduation ceremony. And then for my dissertation, for my master's, I focused in on celiac disease because I was diagnosed with celiac disease in 2014. So, but the reason I wasn't diagnosed is because I had atypical symptoms, and that's what my dissertation was on. And my dissertation has just been published in the Journal of Toxicology.
Amazing. Congratulations.
Yeah, very exciting.
So just taking it back to before you learned anything about nutrition and diet, what did your world look like then? Like what were you eating? What were you struggling with?
I was eating every food in moderation. And I was eating the typical, I'd say, Western diet. So very carbohydrate heavy, lots of processed foods, easy foods, packaged foods, granola bars, things like that, but very small quantities. And then obviously sometimes not eating at all, or binge eating, or getting rid of food completely from my body. So very unhealthy diet, but typical what your doctor would tell you would be a healthy diet. So a lot of packaged foods, a lot of low-fat foods, for sure.
So then you had all these problems. The health problems that you had, were they physical? Did they manifest themselves physically? Like were you weak, ill, those kind of things?
So I had a lot of inflammation, and I was getting a lot of other symptoms along with it. So they kept telling me that I might have hypothyroidism, which I don't have. I don't have anything wrong with my thyroid, but the symptoms from celiac disease were coming in atypically. So I had a lot of inflammation. I was very bloated all the time. And instead of failure to thrive, which is the typical symptom for celiac disease that doctors look for specifically, I was having problems with inflammation and bloating and putting on weight as opposed to not being able to put on weight.
Can you go back and just explain the failure to
So failure to thrive is a very slight person. They are, because of celiac disease, you can't maintain nutrients. So when a person has typical symptoms of celiac disease, which is mostly coined as failure to thrive, they are typically malnourished, and they have those typical symptoms where they can't put height, they don't have height, they don't have, they can't gain weight, they can't put on weight, they can't maintain the nutrients to thrive as a human being.
So a typical response would be to appear gaunt, very thin, malnourished.
Very malnourished, yeah, and to have those to look that way. But the problem is that now we're finding more and more people, and that's what my dissertation was on, is that the research needs to show that, and doctors and healthcare providers need to see that just because you're not having the typical symptoms for failure to thrive doesn't mean you're not failing to thrive. I was failing to thrive, but I looked completely different than someone that is gaunt and slight, and I was just so inflamed. I was squishy. That's the best way that I can describe inflammation, is that you get squishy. You're like a balloon.
Yeah,
You know what I'm
Squishy,
talking
yeah.
about. That's the best way to describe it. And that's, so many people have that, and they don't know what's wrong with them, and their doctors say, I can't figure it out. And because we live in such a carbohydrate and gluten filled society where everybody eats all the breads all the time, you think it can't be that. It can't be that. It's got to be something else.
So can we backtrack, because I'm sure that there's loads of people that are watching that have no idea what celiac disease is. Can we start there?
So
What is
celiac
it?
disease is an intolerance to gluten and wheat. It is not an allergy. It is an intolerance. So there is an allergy where people can go into anaphylactic shock from wheat, and that's I mean, technically it's under the same umbrella, but it's not. This is an IgE response to gluten, which means that it's an autoimmune condition. So it's something in your genetics. It's something that you inherit, and it can only be triggered once you start eating gluten.
So there's obviously a genetic component and an environmental,
It's the perfect storm.
okay.
The two come together, and you create celiac disease. Now, there is non-celiac disease gluten intolerance. That is a thing, but there's not enough research on it just yet for it to be medically coined and medically advanced, that people are looking into it. But a lot of people suffer with different kinds of sensitivities and intolerances to gluten.
Do you know, this is the first time I've thought about it, is there a spectrum of the genetic predisposition to it, the insulin sensitive version, and then is there people that are down here like, yeah, we can churn gluten all day, we thrive on gluten?
I would say definitely, but because the gluten that we have now, like breads, are so heavily processed, so I would say, as a nutritionist, in my professional opinion, that most people don't thrive on gluten because it is so processed. Unless you're home making breads and you're grinding the wheat or the spelt or the grains yourself, and using minimal processing and making a loaf of bread from scratch, buying a loaf of bread that's got a shelf life of 3 weeks without being put in the refrigerator.
Yeah, there's something in there.
Yeah, there's more in there. So now you've got to think about not so much the gluten, because it still is gluten, but what kind of gluten is it? Now we're changing the form.
I heard that a
gluten.
lot of the gluten these days is genetically modified dwarf wheat,
Okay,
which is
yeah.
different from einkorn, which is the
original.
original.
Yeah, this is what I was going to ask.
Yeah.
That's just, what is gluten?
Gluten
is
is
it
a
carb? Is it a
protein.
protein?
It's a protein in wheat.
And why is it so bad? Like, spell it out for people.
Why is it so bad?
As in, because my understanding is the layman's understanding that gluten, and this is what I try to tell people, I don't know how accurate I am, you can set me straight on it. Gluten is a protein that's so tightly bound, it takes the body a lot longer and a lot more, puts a lot more stress on the
Energy.
system.
Yeah, and that can
Is
be
that right or
true.
wrong?
Yeah, that's definitely right. The problem is that every body is different. So every body reacts differently to different foods, and there are people that they won't have necessarily a reaction in the sense of they won't have a rash, they won't lose hair, they won't failure to thrive, they won't have inflammation, but something will happen with them if people will become more sensitive to gluten over time. That seems to be the response.